So I got lost in the sauce on this particular thread. I was kind of trying to browse around, trying to find a solution to running Graphene inside of a VM because I've got Graphene installed on a Pixel 5, but the seed vault is really old for it, and I'm trying to restore a seed vault backup from Calyx onto Graphene to see how things will compare when restoring between the two, but nonetheless, I was browsing through different forum threads, came across this thread from almost a year ago. And this was about basically Celebrite, which is commonly used by law enforcement and forensics to get into phones to get information off of them. And so this is basically talking about like comparing iPhones and which ones are vulnerable to Celebrite in different configurations. And a lot of iPhones end up being pretty open and vulnerable in a lot of cases. And iPads as well. And then it has a listing for Android OSs. So you've got your standard Android OSs and then GrapheneOS is separated all on its own for some reason, which is interesting because when you, can I open image in new tab, image in new tab? So if we look at the image here, we've got basically in BFU mode, you have full file system access to it in an update prior to 2022. And then after that, you have to, and then brute forcing it up to late 2022. But then after that, whether it be BFU mode or AFU mode, you don't have that access to it after that 2022, any updates after then. And you see the same trend. You see basically the normal trend of you've got full system access, file system access to GrapheneOS as long as it's unlocked, which is pretty normal on pretty much any phone. And you see that here as well from on up to like the Pixel 8 lineup. And the Pixel 8 and Pixel 9 have some new things in the hardware that basically do some memory checking that AOSP doesn't fully take advantage of, or even Google's OS for that matter. So again, you've got a support matrix that shows you tells you kind of the meanings behind everything and things like that. So this thread has been going on for almost a year, but I was kind of getting down into the weeds and nitty gritty of things because people kept asking different questions and things like that. And I found it interesting with the number of things that they talked about. So they do recommend if going to a new phone, you get a Pixel 8 or a Pixel 9 series, just due to the fact that it has that better hardened stuff. Again, I'm looking at switching my Pixel to a GrapheneOS rather than Calyx, and there's a lot of good reason for that at this point. Some of which is some of the features that Graphene has aren't in Calyx, and a lot of it seems a lot better in Graphene, and I just want to be able to take what I have on Calyx and move it over to Graphene, so I'm trying to proof of concept what I've got. But the seed vault backup between the one on the Pixel 5 and what's on Calyx currently are like 2 or 3 versions out of date. So, but security features of Graphene. So one of the interesting ones, so the official GrapheneOS account here on their forums has been very active in posting things in this thread for the longest while. And what's cool is the USB-C port stuff, security stuff. It disables it pretty much at the hardware level when you set it for charging only or completely disable it. So let's see. It's implemented by setting to act in a certain way. There's even support for fully disabling it while booted into regular OS to block charging, including USB PD as well. So you've got a whole bunch of security features and graphene to include like scopes and things like that, which is one thing that is very attractive to me, is the ability to tell an app, hey, you have permission for this, but you really don't because of permission scoping, which Calyx does not have at all. And there are a lot of things that Calyx does where micro-G is integrated into everything. It really, at the end of the day, doesn't do too much, it seems. And even then, it's a worse implementation at this point. And of course, the primary graphene developer has been railing on Calyx's implementation of the way they do things. So, and again, Celebrite Premium, largely police work and stuff. So, up here, earlier on in the thread, they get talking about different hardware. Fedora, okay, so in certain situations, graphene is built in such a way to make your phone way more secure because it's a mobile device and it's always on you, and mobile devices now have pretty much all the information anybody could ever want on you, or access to all the information you could ever want. You've got your two-factor authentication codes, you've got email, you've got text messages, you've got your secure chats on there and everything else. And all this is stored on your phone. A lot of phones now have encrypted settings, but as noted by the diagrams earlier on, certain tools like Celebrite are able to just open up the device willy-nilly when you have the settings set up correctly or incorrectly, or if you have the wrong device completely. iOS, far and above, is worse at securing than GrapheneOS by far, as noted again by the diagrams. What the Graphene developer gets into, and you can see through some of these posts, is the matter of desktop Linux being less secure than macOS, and far in macOS still being far less secure than any smartphone pretty much. Because again, a smartphone is always on the person and it's got all this information for them. So it's important for a lot of people to secure the device, or at least to phone manufacturers to make sure that at least there's some level of security. So, if I can find, I think the first post railing on it is down further. Yeah. Okay. So Fedora on a framework laptop will provide essentially zero physical security with no protection against data extraction after you've entered the encryption passphrase. It will only protect your data while the device is powered off. macOS will provide far better physical protection. macOS will also be harder to exploit. Implementation of secure boot and attestation by both that hardware and the OS is incomplete and insecure. It provides no real-world security benefits. It neither provides against attacker persistence after exploitation or physical attackers. It's worked towards real security features without getting to the point that it actually works, similar to locking your front door in a house where there are no walls, just a wooden frame. It's up here further. I was looking at it and staring at it because the argument was basically that because of the way that desktop operating systems are, the hardware doesn't have the locking ability because of the number of keys that it has to support and the way that it can be exploited. And it's due to the nature of a desktop versus, like, say, even a laptop in many cases. A desktop is going to sit in one place at home. It doesn't go with you like a smartphone does. But there's also a larger plethora of hardware and software that you can run on it than on a phone device. So I think what is really lacking in the argument is just the scope and risk of in the security model. So you talk a lot about physical access and physical protection, but you, in essence, say that because of that, it's in here somewhere, because, it doesn't provide that physical protection like a smartphone does at a basic level, therefore it's insecure and it doesn't matter, so you should use this instead. When in all reality, the use case and the risk management that you're doing with a desktop versus a smartphone is far less. Because it's a lot harder to sneak out with a desktop computer and even a laptop. Whereas sneaking out with a smartphone, you just slip that into your pocket and you're gone. And nobody would be able to tell that you have it hardly at all. It would actually look pretty normal if you had a smartphone in your pocket. Someone steals your smartphone, they walk out, everybody sees a smartphone in their pocket, it's unidentified. It's completely normal. Whereas with a laptop, maybe you'd get a little bit more suspicion. If it was a desktop, far more. And the feasibility of getting an iPhone versus a desktop computer, you're probably going to have more access to things on that iPhone than you are on the desktop computer. Because again, everything is logged into on that phone, which makes it more valuable than, say, the desktop in most cases when you're dealing with individual people. So having the physical access controls on a smartphone makes sense, whereas maybe less so on a desktop. But at the same time, there are certain things software things, that can be done to sandbox things that I think are in a lot of ways being overlooked. So sure, yes, you can still plug in a USB device into a computer and have system access to a network. Whereas it's going to be a little bit harder. You have a couple more hoops to go through with an iPhone or something like that, or a smartphone. But the smartphone, in a lot of ways, is more juicy because of the amount of data you have access to. And if you were to get an executive's phone, the amount of data that you have access to there, you don't have to have physical access to the corporate building or anything, because their phone is on them very likely. So you can just wait for them to come out. It's also, there's... I don't like the argument because you're arguing over one thing, which makes sense why you're doing it. We do want to take that into consideration. But we're also accepting the risk is a lot lesser than with physical access to a smartphone. So I think this is part of it. The implementation of secure boot and attestation by both that hardware and the OS Fedora is incomplete and insecure. Yeah, so as noted, no real-world security benefits. This is, in a lot of ways, yes, you still have access to be able to flash the firmware remotely if they can get into the device. It still requires getting into the device through the software, but a lot of times you can end up sandboxing things in certain ways to make it less likely when you don't have actual physical access to it. And in a lot of cases, you're not going to have that physical access like you will on a digital scale, where it's much more feasible for many actors to just gain remote access. So here someone mentions later on that CubesOS has basically sandboxing against USB exploits, closer to GrapheneOS. Again, GrapheneOS comes in. CubesOS doesn't protect against USB exploits, so I locked to the same degree as GrapheneOS, because the USB controller and USB guest can be exploited. containing the attacker to the USB controller and to the VM by handling USB isn't comparable to eliminating most of the attack surface. The attacker getting code execution in the USB controller virtual machine is much more than not having something to exploit. GrapheneOS provides much stronger protection against USB drivers being exploited. CubesOS provides much better containment and access control for USB. We do plan to add USB peripheral access control for users, but it needs to avoid destroying usability. Lower priority than desktop laptop due to how they're used. So again, this comes down to how a device is used. A phone is often a 2FA device and things like that, whereas a desktop laptop have different use cases. When you're looking at the attack surface and environment that you're going into, again, a lot of people have their smartphone on them. They don't generally carry their laptop everywhere with them, or especially their desktop computer. So kind of moaning over the fact that a lot of desktop hardware is less secure and this, that, and the other seems kind of like a dumb point to be making, in my opinion, honestly. So laptops, desktops have serious physical security, don't have serious physical security, so USB exploits are really not needed for exploiting them after the encryption passphrase is entered. This comes down to encryption, and it's no less different than your smartphone and having access to it while it's unlocked. If somebody has your phone unlocked and they plug it into a computer, all they have to do is tell it, yes, go ahead and unlock, basically, and it will give them file system access. Granted, I know in Calyx, you now have to verify that you want to, change modes to like transferring files or things like that. So you do have to verify via PIN, fingerprint, what have you, that it is you doing that action. So that may be changing, but in all reality, there are a lot of things where, yeah, of course, while it's running, it's still going to be unencrypted. It's just like your phone. It's really no different. Yeah, you shut it off and it's going to leave everything encrypted because it doesn't have the encryption keys loaded up to decrypt everything. So the use cases are in a lot of ways very similar, but different because of the application of the use that's being had. People pull out their smartphones while they're with their friends, out eating lunch, and they're staring at their phone. They leave it on the table unlocked to go get up, go get their utensils, go get their napkins, and then come back, where someone can swipe it pretty easily. Whereas someone swipes a laptop, it's a little bit more conspicuous or inconspicuous. Yeah, conspicuous. That's the word I think I'm looking for, yeah. It's a little bit more noticeable when that happens, whereas a smartphone, you can kind of like pick up and go. And if you've ever seen videos of like the dude running around and stealing phones, that's another case too. Again, it's able to be carried a lot easier, whereas a laptop at a lot of times is carried in a backpack, in a bag of some sort, and sometimes is more secure, but it still takes a lot more effort to get to the laptop than to a smartphone being held in someone's hand while they're walking down the road. So your security attack surface, in a lot of ways, is more open on a smartphone than on a laptop or desktop for those reasons, which, again, I think is being overlooked in this case. And beyond that, macOS is more juicy, or pulling out a Mac is more juicy because you can sell a Mac for way more than a lot of other PCs on the market. If you liked the content, if you enjoyed it, if you think I deserve it, like, comment, subscribe, leave any criticisms you have or what have you. I appreciate it. Feed that algorithm, like I said, and I will see you guys in the next one.